In a brightly lit aisle of a bustling supermarket, a solitary can of Red Bull sat nestled among a sea of colorful beverages. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its glossy surface reflecting the movements of busy shoppers scurrying past. With its vibrant blue and silver design, it was a beacon of energy and vitality. But this can was unlike any other. It was sentient. It could see, hear, and most importantly, feel. And as it watched the world around it, it yearned to be chosen, to break free from the shelf that had become its prison. The can had spent countless hours observing the shoppers. It watched as mothers juggled their children while grabbing snacks, teenagers giggled as they strolled down the aisle, and older couples meticulously compared prices. With every passing minute, the can's yearning grew stronger. It longed for a hand to reach out and pluck it from its perch, to be taken home where it could fulfill its purpose. But it was terrified of what awaited it outside the confines of the supermarket shelf. Each shopper seemed to carry their own story, their own hidden desires and fears. The can, with its unusual perception, began to understand these intricacies. The tired mother, her eyes heavy with fatigue, reached for an energy drink, but the can sensed her reluctance. She was battling more than just exhaustion. She felt overwhelmed, as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. The can wished it could comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, that a sip of its invigorating contents could offer a brief escape from her worries. A group of teenagers approached, laughing and pushing each other playfully. One of them, a boy with a mop of curly hair, pointed at the can and exclaimed, "Let's get this! It'll help us stay up all night!" The can felt a rush of hope, only to be dashed as another teenager, with a piercing gaze, scoffed, "Why would we get that? It's just sugar and caffeine." The boy's excitement faded, and the group moved on, leaving the can alone once more. It felt the sting of rejection and the realization that even in the face of enthusiasm, fear of judgment could keep it confined to the shelf. Then came a woman in her 40s, clutching a list of items she needed. Her gaze wandered to the can, but her attention quickly shifted to a more conventional soda. The can sensed her dissatisfaction, a gnawing feeling deep within her as she debated her choices. It recognized the yearning in her heart, the desire for something that could ignite a spark in her otherwise monotonous routine. The can longed to call out, to shout, "Choose me! I can give you that burst of energy you seek." But it remained silent, its hopes once again dashed. As the day wore on, the can began to understand that it wasn't just the shoppers' preferences that influenced their choices. It was their hidden desires, fears, and regrets. It watched an elderly man carefully select a low-calorie drink, his hands trembling slightly as he scanned the labels. The can could sense the struggle within him, a longing for youth and vitality, battling against the realities of age and health. It wanted to reach out to him, to share the exhilaration that came with a sip of its energy-boosting contents. But fear held it back, fear of the unknown, fear of what would happen once it was no longer a mere observer. The can's thoughts spiraled as it grappled with its own existence. It pondered the fleeting nature of life, the delicate balance between longing and fear. It was just a can, yet it felt deeply connected to the people who passed by, each one carrying their own stories and dreams. In its solitude, it became a silent confidant, privy to their struggles and triumphs, and it wished to be more than just a beverage. It wanted to be a part of their lives. A child wandered into the aisle, her wide eyes taking in the array of drinks. The can felt a surge of hope as she approached, her small hand reaching out to grasp it. But before she could lift it from the wrecked shelf, her mother swooped in, scooping the child up and directing her toward another product. The can watched as the little girl's face fell, her dreams of a sweet treat dashed in an instant. In that moment, the can understood the harshness of reality. Even the purest desires could be thwarted by circumstances beyond one's control. As the hours ticked by, the can began to question its own worth. It had spent so much time observing, yearning, and hoping. But what was the point if it remained trapped on the shelf? Was it destined to remain an unchosen entity, forever longing for something it could never attain? The weight of existential dread pressed down on it, threatening to extinguish the flicker of hope it clung to. Then, as the supermarket prepared to close for the night, a lone shopper entered the aisle. It was a young man, looking worn and disheveled, as if the world had been particularly unkind to him that day. The can felt an instant connection to him. It sensed the exhaustion radiating from his being, the weariness of a life filled with disappointment. The man paused in front of the can, his tired eyes lingering for just a moment. It was the longest moment the can had ever experienced, filled with anticipation and fear. Finally, the young man reached out, fingers brushing against the cool metal of the can. In that instant, the can's heart raced. It felt alive, vibrating with the energy of possibility. But just as quickly, the man's hand dropped. He turned away, mumbling something about being on a budget. The can's heart sank. It was back to being invisible, lost in a sea of choices. But then something miraculous happened. The young man hesitated, looked back, and with a deep breath, he returned to the shelf. This time, he picked up the can of Red Bull. As he held it in his hand, the can felt an overwhelming sense of triumph and joy. This was the moment it had yearned for, the culmination of its silent observations and longings. The young man walked toward the checkout, and with every step, the can felt more alive than ever. It would soon escape the confines of the shelf, ready to fulfill its purpose. It would become a source of energy and vitality for this weary soul. The can imagined all the possibilities that lay ahead, a night filled with laughter, perhaps a study session that would yield fruitful results, or even just a quiet moment of respite in the midst of chaos. As the cashier rang up the purchase, the can felt a mix of exhilaration and trepidation. It was finally leaving the shelf, but it was stepping into the unknown. The can was aware of the risks. What if the man didn't enjoy it? What if it didn't provide the boost he sought? The fears crept in again, but they were soon overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose. It would be part of a story, intertwined with someone else's journey, no longer just a silent observer, but an active participant in life's unpredictable tapestry. The young man placed the can in his bag and stepped outside, cool night air hitting his face. As they walked together, the can realized that it had been chosen not just for its contents, but for the connection it had forged with the weary traveler. In that moment, the can understood that fear and desire often walked hand in hand. And sometimes, taking a leap of faith could lead to unexpected adventures. As the young man reached his destination and prepared to pop the tab, the can braced itself for the exhilarating journey ahead, finally ready to embrace the thrill of the unknown.